And we're back. Thanks for joining me again for another Adobe Illustrator tutorial. We're coming to you with the third installment in this series. This is the How to Draw series, and this is our second video. And what this third set is actually describing is going to be the inking process. Now, I may break this down into several videos, or I may just make it a really lengthy one for the inking process, but we previously discussed thumbnails and sketching and then tightening up your line work, and how the line work is the foundation for a really, really good piece. So you want to make sure that you've gotten your layout and everything uh, across very well in your actual sketch. And then when you tighten it up, you have to be 100% sure that's what you want, because this is the foundation for your line work, which basically is going to build upon everything else. So your piece is only going to be as good as the foundation that's underneath it. Okay? So as you can see, I have my piece here, and I'm working on Frieza from the Dragon Ball Z series. Again, if you are not familiar with him, he is a villain from the Dragon Ball Z series. He's my favorite villain, and he's actually in the recently released movie that's come out for Dragon Ball, and it is Resurrection of F, where he comes back to life. Long story, if you follow the series. They end up killing this guy. He's evil, but somewhere along the lines, in this movie, they bring him back to life so that he can be a villain again. So there are three main tools, and if you've seen any of my videos before, you know that I've discussed this with you, and it's basically that there are three main tools that you can really utilize when developing your line work. There are brush tools, the pen tool, and there's the pencil tool. Now there are two types of brush tools. There is the blob brush, and then there is the regular brush tool. Now, the difference between the two is the blob brush is basically a pressure sensitive brush that works almost like an art brush, where the heavier you press on the actual canvas itself, the larger the actual shape of the brush will be. It works in a fill format. The regular brush tool will apply different types of strokes to the actual brush, or different specialized brush strokes that are set in your brush palette, that you'll see. Usually it's next to your swatches, and you can open different brush libraries, and you can apply those as the brushes you want to use when you are using the brush tool. Not many use that tool at all, only when they're using it to add special uh, effects, so to speak, or textures to items. But what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the blob brush, the pen tool, and the pencil tool. And now the pencil tool and the pen tool are almost identical, except in terms of their appearance. But in terms of how they function, they're completely different. You couldn't get any more different than these two tools. The pencil tool functions like the brush tool does in terms of fluidity and being like a normal pen, pencil, and you just drawing on the canvas. Whereas the pen tool uses the accuracy of curves. They're called Bezier curves, Bezier curves. And what they do is they work on a push and pull concept of anchor points. So you would essentially lay down an anchor point and push or pull that anchor point to change or stretch the actual line. So think of it like a rubber band. But I'm going to go and explain each one of these to you subtly. And we'll start off with, let's start with the blob brush tool. So right now we have the blob brush tool in our toolbar. Now my setup is a little weird, and most setups have it on the right hand side. But anyway, if you were to go down and you were to look at your toolbar, you'll see that the blob brush tool can actually be utilized by hitting Shift and B on your keyboard. And it'll bring up this tool, and if you double click on the tool, you'll bring up its options. Now, you can change the fidelity of it, which will give you a more accurate or a smoother line, depending upon how your hand movement is on the actual board. Most people have to, finagle with it and figure out what's more comfortable with them. So I won't tell you where to put it, but if you want more smooth lines, if you find it difficult drawing curves, you can change it at any given time and draw curves more towards the smooth end of the spectrum. Or if you want more accuracy, which is going to give you more anchor points, you would go to the accurate end of the spectrum. The only thing with that is when you have more anchor points, it's harder to manipulate uh, single lines. You have to manipulate a lot of anchor points to then adjust it afterwards. So that's something you may want to be careful with. But when you're using the blob brush tool, the thing is, because it works with a fill, and let's just change our stroke and fill color to make sure we have this set up. You can use the eraser tool instead and not have to really worry about changing anchor points and other items as such. So let's go back into the options, and we can have it where it keeps the selected items highlighted, and it can merge new strokes only with selected items, right? Or it can merge it if they're not selected. Right now it would merge if they weren't selected because it's not checked in the box. Same thing with the keep selected box. It would not keep it selected after you're finished with making a stroke. It would actually deselect the stroke. Otherwise, it would stay selected for you to manipulate further when done. But underneath, you'll see that you have three options. You have size, angle, and roundness. Now, for the angle, that's basically in 360 degrees, which way you're going to want the brush to shake. And it'll point in the direction of this actual arrow that you find in this actual options box. So this is the shape editor. And you'll also notice there are two dots here, right? These dots actually change the roundness of the actual brush, and you'll see that on the slider below as we push and pull, or you can just do it here and it'll reflect in the window up there. Same thing with the angle. But you can manipulate that depending upon how you want the stroke to look on the outside, or your overall brush to look on the outside of your piece, or on shaded areas. A lot of comic book artists, the particular hatch shading that they use, they angle the brush, so you could develop a brush that's angled at a certain size with a certain pressure, so that way it makes it simpler for you to do that. Let's say, for instance, we have an angle that is, we're going to be shading down to, let's say, the southeast direction. Okay, so that's why the arrow's going here, and we want our brush to kind of be slim, but let's just make it a little bit bigger so we can actually see what we're doing. And we can make it pressure sensitive, tilt relative, and you can change the variation. The variation essentially means is that depending upon the amount of pressure that's applied, it will change the variation between strokes a certain amount. So that way, if it's a lighter pressure, you'll get this, heavy pressure this, and then the regular pressure you'll get right in the middle. But you have various options: fixed, random, pressure, stylus, wheel, tilt, bearing, and rotation. These are options for how you're holding your pen, the pressure you're applying, whether it's tilted, what angle you're actually hashing down on, or how you're rotating the actual pen while you're using it. Okay. And right now I'm working on a Wacom companion. So again, this is why I have these options. If you did not have a pressure sensitive tablet, you would not see these options. It would remain on fixed, or you could choose random. Now the size, again, that's just changing for the size of the actual brush itself. So let's click OK, and we're just gonna use this to mark down some items. And you see how it has that shape, and you can see it on the actual brush itself. It's a small ovalesque shape, and right now I'm doing very, very light stroke work, but if I were to press, I could get thicker lines by pressing heavier on the actual pen itself. All right, so let's say I shaded something in all black, and then I just wanted these hash mark edges like they may do in comics sometimes. This isn't as accurate because I'm doing a quick job, but you get the point. Sometimes they will shade an object, and then they'll use these marks on the edges of the object to actually shade it more. And you see right now I can add to that actual shading, and see they've all joined. Now if I were to select in my options box to merge only with selection, and let's say I go here, and then I do this, and I do that. If I were to then click on it, these are still their individual shapes. However, like I did before, if I were to go back in and click off of the merge only with selected and go like this, this, and this, if I were to select it now, it's all one shape. That's how the blob brush operates. So you can do a lot of things with the actual blob brush tool. And when you're doing these things, it's just more so if you're somebody who likes, let's say, utilizing ink pens or light brushes when they're doing their ink work, they can utilize this. It works as a fill color. So I'm going to change the size, make it a little bit smaller, and I'm going to change the angle back and the roundness back again. Let's see, I'll leave it a little flat. And then I can actually lightly go around this, and you'll see how it kind of curves itself out. Now it did that on its own without me, and you'll notice I'm going as close as possible, but you'll notice that the line will then, once I lift the brush up, it slightly flexes and changes shape. Now the reason it did that is because the option that I actually have set on the brush, and that option is for the accuracy to be here. Now I could change it to complete accuracy, and I can do this, and there's virtually no change at all with what I'm doing. But you'll notice it's more jagged. Now let me get rid of that line, and if I were to change it, and let's say we go to 100% smooth, I can do this, and I can actually be inaccurate with it, and you see how it changes this line to a curve. It's very, very intuitive, very useful. So, I mean, one of the best things to do is to govern when you do and do not want to do these things. Okay. And if you are comfortable enough, you'll learn that you can press light and then figure out when to press harder and lighter when you want certain effects on your actual art piece, because then the line will adjust and change and flex to make it thin or thick according to what you're doing. So let's actually, let's get all this and let's clear it. And that's pretty much how the brush tool operates. You can use it for shading. You can add to it if you're not happy with the piece. And one of the things I tell people to get familiar with is the actual eraser tool when you're using the actual brush tool itself. And the reason why is because the eraser tool goes hand in hand with that tool, just like a regular eraser would if you're using a pencil. And you can get rid of unwanted marks that are left on your piece. Now, the eraser tool in conjunction opens up, and it has a very similar setup where you can change the angle, roundness, and size in the same manner that you did for the actual brush tool. So it's something you may want to get familiarized with. It's very useful, and you always want to use that in conjunction with a tool that uses a fill as its property. So let's select these again, and let's clear it. Now the next tool we're going to talk about is the pencil tool. The pencil tool very much so operates in a similar manner, except you don't get the options of pressure, sensitivity, and things like that. But you do get the option of the smoothness or accuracy. You can opt to fill the new pencil strokes. You can keep them selected, or you could deselect them just like the brush tool. And if you were to click the Alt key, you can choose this option. There's a tool called the Smooth tool. And essentially what this tool does is it allows you to go along the pencil tool line with the smooth tool, and it's actually in the pencil tools drop down option. And that would actually allow you to smooth out any awkwardly shaped lines, okay? If you wanted it to be a smoother curve, and I'll show you how to do that. And then you can go edit selected paths, and you can change the amount of distance you would have to be near it before it starts to edit that path, okay? But I'm going to deselect that and deselect the keep selected option. I'm going to click OK, and we're already on the fairly accurate aspect, so we're going to leave it here. Now remember, the pencil tool works off of strokes, So see, there's no matter how hard I press down or how light, I'm getting the same level of strokes. Now, the reason that is because I would then manipulate these based on the stroke option menu that I have here. And what you can do with that is you can also change the profiles so that they look slightly different, or you can create your own profiles and save them once you've created them on the board, or however you're going to create your profiles. I'll talk about that in another lesson, in another tutorial, but for now I'm just showing you what the options are that are here already. Now, the thing we were discussing before was the actual smooth tool, and you'll see that here, right? Now, the smooth tool will take something like this and allow you to then adjust how smooth that actual line is by just going over it in the smooth way that you want it to reflect. See? So let's select this line. Actually, let's create another line. Let's create one going from here to, let's say, here. Now I'm making this inaccurate on purpose, just so I can show you what it ends up looking like when you increase that level. Put it in there. Okay, so now we have that thicker line, but we can see that it's not circular. It's not round enough. So what we would do is we would select it, go into our pencil option, click the smooth tool, and then we can go around the edge and smoothen this out. What it starts to do is it removes certain anchor points and make sure that your line is smoother. Now, see, it smoothed out this area, but because this came up at such an arc, I would then have to use my direct selection tool and change the actual handles on the tool. All right, but that's essentially how the pencil tool works. Again, you can change the profile of the actual stroke if you wanted it to look a little different. There are any number of things that you can actually do, and you use the direct selection tool to actually select the anchor points and push and pull and adjust those anchor points. Now, because we're doing this, this is going to help us move smoothly into the pen tool options. Now, with the pen tool, and we've kind of, we've discussed this already, but you have a push and pull concept with the pen tool. And essentially what it is it's very similar to a rubber band. And if you look at what I actually just, created on the board with the pencil tool, you'll see that I pushed and pulled this using the direct selection tool. Well, the same way I did that is how I would utilize the pen tool. Now, you could utilize that by hitting P on your keyboard. And if you were to click, I'm going to do the same thing I did over here. But this is like a point and click based drawing tool. So I click my starting point, and then I click some other point that I want it to end, and I can pull this, which is actually an anchor point. I pull out the handles. That's what these things are. They're handles. The thing in the middle, right here, is the anchor point. These are the handles, and this curve is called a Bezier curve because that's what it does. It creates that curve depending upon how you push or pull the angle of the actual handles. Now, you see, the reason this is actually my favorite tool, and the reason this is my favorite tool is because it has a ridiculous level of accuracy. Now, a lot of people feel, and I agree with them, if you don't know how to utilize it properly, it can make your piece look too static, almost geometric and not organic, because the hand isn't that steady. So there's a natural zig and zag or jig to each line or stroke that you create that creates a certain level of authenticity in your artwork. So when you create stuff with this, you have to then learn how to manipulate it. Just like I told you, they have the profiles. The same thing goes for this. Same thing. That when you utilize the pencil tool, you can do that with the pen tool. You can then go into the stroke options, and you can change the shape of the stroke itself. Now the difference is On this item, there were already several anchor points. Now, I told you before, if you remember me discussing in the blob brush tool, I said one of the problems with accuracy in those options is it provides you with more anchor points. When we used the smooth tool, it reduced the number of anchor points and it made it smoother. Essentially, that's the correlation. You reduce the anchor points, you have the potential of making a line smoother or making it easier to manipulate. This only has two anchor points, the beginning and the end. Because the handles at the end are the contributing factors to its form, I can manipulate this only having to manipulate the one point of the line. Now, the problem is I may want this line to curve this way, but want this center point to come out. Now, how do I do that? I have to add an anchor point. If you were to go into your pen's submenu or hit the plus button, you can add an anchor point to any point on that line, and then you can manipulate that with the direct selection tool. And see, now I can pull it here. I still have the option of manipulating the anchor point that was at the end of the line. I also have the option of manipulating the one at the middle of the line. Now, there's more to these anchor point manipulations as well, but I'm not going to go into that in full detail. But if you were to hold the spacebar key while clicking on an anchor point, you can actually change where that anchor point is being placed. Let's say one of the biggest issues, even in Photoshop, was that once you placed an anchor point down, or put your pen somewhere, that was it. You had no option of moving that point, even if it was off. So let's say I wanted to place it here, but I accidentally placed it here. I'd have to keep undoing and doing it over and doing it over until I got exactly on the point I wanted. Now you can click it, you can hit your space bar, and then you can move that point to wherever you want it to be if you accidentally did not nail down the point in the beginning, and then you could just start developing your line work. So these are options that you have with that, as well as, let's say we created this curve, but I wanted to change the way this angle is, but I didn't want to affect the other, let's say, handle. Usually when you create a curve, the handles are always a straight handle. No matter where one handle is, the other one is always pointing in the exact opposite direction. But if you want to make a sharp turn, which is then going to turn it into a point as opposed to a curve, you would hold the Alt key down and you can select the anchor point. Let's do that here. And you can manipulate it and change it how you want it. Okay, so it doesn't have to be directly straight like you normally would have it. This is how it normally would look. And you can then change and manipulate them independent of one another. Once you've hit the Alt key, you've broken the anchor point and you've allowed its handles to work independently of one another. Okay, so that's another option that you have. You also have the option of splitting an anchor point, which if you were to go up to the options menu in your menu bar for your specific tool, you can cut the path at that anchor point. And what that now does is it allows you to separate it into two segments. So you can break pieces apart. Let's say we have these pieces. And one of the things that I want to do is, let me get rid of that. I want to create the jawline. I can start here, go here, and then I can come up here if I wanted to. If let's just say that's some weird way I decided to actually design this. And let's increase the stroke size so we can see it. One of the biggest things is once you've increased the stroke size and you're looking at it, you'll notice that I might not want this line to be here. I may want to break this line apart at these points. So what I would then do is I have to first add anchor points. The first thing I would do is I would go in my pen menu, add an anchor point at this point, add another one here, and then I can select both of those points and I can click the cut anchor point or cut path, and then once I've selected that path, I can clear it out, and now I have the open area in the actual path itself. So it's very simple, and then I can manipulate these independent of one another. If I wanted to then change the profile to something like this, or something like that, I now have different options for the stroke for those. Now, there's one other thing that's in the actual pen tool menu, or two actually. There's the delete anchor point tool, which is pretty self-explanatory. You can click on the end of an anchor point and just delete that specific anchor point. And then you have the anchor point tool, which basically, it used to be the convert tool, which would essentially convert from an ankle or an essentially convert from an anchor to a curve. So you can change it where, as let's say we have a curved line, I can click this point at the end and make it straight. And you'll notice that that's what it's doing if you were to look really closely. This is a curve currently, but if I were to click here, it then straightens it to the next anchor point. And I could click that and it would straighten it as well, making it straight angles. I can also do the opposite and click and pull, just like I did with the pen tool, and create a new curve. So that's how you would operate with these tools. Now, the benefit of the pencil and the pen tool is you can actually utilize these tools to create, a, let's say I click on the pen tool again, I can create solid shapes instead of just lines, and I can fill them in if I were to change the fill and stroke. Same thing with the pencil tool. Let's go into that tool. I would just have to make sure that I connect with the first point, and you'll see that once you get to the initial point that you started, a closed circle will come up, which represents you actually closing the item and making a fill. So because I have it set to fill, it's not showing, because remember we have to use strokes for these. But essentially, you see that they're closed items now, and if I wanted to simply change it to a fill, I would change that fill color, and now we have a fill. For the blob brush, I could do the same thing. The only difference is this right now, let's say we select this. This is a fill. If I were to change it to stroke, now we have a double stroke. That's the only downfall of this, is you may just want one singular stroke, which is usually the case, as opposed to one on the inside and one on the outside of the shape. So you have to be careful when you're utilizing this. So take the time, take your sketch that you've developed, and figure out which tool works more comfortably for you. And then go around your piece, test out the areas, play with the stroke size, uh, how you're utilizing the anchor points and manipulating the curves of the actual stroke, and see which one works best for you. When I come back, I will have created a full black outline for this piece, just so that way you'll be able to see how it looks once you've developed the actual ink for your piece. All right, so again, this is the One Will Focus. You can find me on Instagram at the One Will Focus. My website is theonewillfocus.com. And in our next section, we will discuss laying out flat colors for the piece. Okay, so thanks again for joining me, guys. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.